Specifically in my role, the biggest challenge in writing and in communication of any kind really is managing expectations and making sure that your message is clear. We're dealing with a lot of very technical problems that have a lot of detail in an industry that's largely not standardized in terms of terminology and what our users or our clients should be really expecting. You have to work really hard to make sure that you're very clear in all your communication about what's happening, what you're going to deliver to them, what they should be expecting. I think in more recent time, in the past couple of months, I've been working on a new feature for our software where it's a little bit more of a technical solution to what we're having to provide because it's a pretty complex problem in our software. And I think I've probably had 20 or 30 meetings about essentially the same thing, reiterating it in different ways to help them understand how that piece of the software is going to work. And it immediately comes down to that the level of knowledge that the listeners had was not where I thought it was the first time I talked to them. And then the second time it was, not the right terminology. And then the third time I got a correspondence from them and realized that they had the wrong idea of what was coming out. And then there's just always little things there where you're driving closer and closer to a clear picture of that communication and use it to sort of, I think that as a product manager, we joke about having to, nothing's ever understood till it's been said 20 times.
Two things pop to mind: giving bad news or explaining a really complex situation or problem in simple terms. And I think sometimes those are tied together, right? So we did really have an example where we coded an item wrong. It was one of our clients' biggest launches that they'd had in 2 or 3 years. And we coded the item wrong and they wanted the sales right away, and we weren't going to see those sales for another month. So maybe that sounds minor, but it was a huge issue. And communicating that, that's something you a lot of times want to communicate in person, right? Some of those really tough conversations are things that you want to look someone eye to eye and say, I'm really sincerely sorry. Here's our plan. Here's how we're going to move forward. And we were able to do that in a couple situations, but this is a broad problem. I mean, this is going to affect more than 3 people. This is going to affect the entire organization. So communicating that kind of message to a broad organization in a way that shows your sincerity, but that you're not going too much down that path of too apologetic, but that shows you're trusted, that you can count on us to fix this. This isn't going to happen again. We're doing everything we can. That you take it really seriously, but yet give enough information to the audience of why this happened, but not overcomplicate it. Because you can't, if you're sending an email blast to 1,000 people, you don't want to get too complicated. You want to save those really special, unique conversations for one-on-one. So I think those two things, they can sometimes be connected in our business, but are the hardest things to communicate. I still think that there's a challenge with being a woman in any male dominated industry. We work with I work in beer, so it's a lot of guys who have run that business for a long time. I will say, though, I think it's changing. And I think a lot of organizations are really aware. Both the client that I work for and the company that I work for put forth a lot of effort to make sure that women are seen and heard in the workplace. So I think while things are changing, yeah, there's absolutely still a lot of challenges as being a woman in the workplace. I think another thing that we need to do as women is speak up a little bit more. I think myself, if I'm in a room of smart people, I'm not the first one to speak up. And so I think both men and women should be aware of that. And it's not just a gender thing, but if you see someone in the room and they're not speaking up, ask them what their thoughts are on the subject. You don't have to point them out, but ask them, because there are a lot of people, especially women, who might not feel as comfortable speaking up in a male-dominated industry.
Honestly, it's understanding the hidden agendas and, understanding what can be said, what somebody else might hear and disagree with, who else might be put in a difficult situation. Say that I'm working on a project. So-and-so asks about the project. do I assume that so-and-so is supportive of the project or not supportive of the project? How much do I reveal? If I talk about it, do I assume that the other person I'm working on wants the other person to know about the project? And that, I think, goes back to that trust thing. In a situation, I think, where there's not a lot of trust, it can be challenging. How come it's a lot of like the politics of who gets CC'd on emails, on who do you include, who do you not include, don't include so-and-so. It can be incredibly political and it can be incredibly stressful. So that is my biggest challenge.
The most challenging part is when the other party does not take a minute to think about context and what it is that I'm asking for or what I want to know, or if it's something they're asking me, just recognizing I may not have the same skill set. So if a lawyer begins asking me a whole bunch of questions that are really, the purpose of those questions is to get answers that he's going to integrate into a legal document, I don't know where he's going with it. I may, but if I don't, then it's a lot harder for me to answer. And if somebody's asking me a bunch of very detailed questions and my focus has been high level, it's hard for me to answer, or at least give them the answer that they're looking for.
The biggest challenge, I'd say, is when, maybe it's not the biggest. It's the most annoying challenge is technology, when technology goes wrong. Sometimes it just goes wrong, right? Sometimes the internet gets slow right when you need to do something really fast. It happens. It's funny to think, $1 million companies is, it happens. It happens everywhere. And from a sales perspective, making messages that stick out, because buyers get like tons of email. They just get tons of it, right? And you have to make it stick out. One of the guys that trained me when I was new in this business, he was a big proponent of putting everything that a buyer needs to know in the subject line. Everything in the subject line. He's like, then you can put detail in the body of the message, but you want that subject line. That's what makes or breaks it.
I didn't expect, and maybe everybody would have said this, I don't know, or everybody's having the same experience, but I did not expect that I would be doing this much communicating with so many different people. And I think just, again, sheer volume, 10,000 hours, 100 million emails, whatever the measure is, all of that fades away because you start realizing that every, dim-witted, insulting email, or the email that's completely composed in a subject line, or the accusation that you were supposed to do something and didn't do it, and then there happens to be a paper trail where you did everything you needed to do. Everything washes away as long as you're doing your job. It's just not worth it to have to stifle that kind of knee-jerk emotional response, especially because it's in writing, meaning you're reading it. This isn't a conversation you're having in real time. That's the advantage of it. I think it's always for better. Of course, that said, meet new guy, interview with a new guy, get strung along with new guy. Had a pretty snippy email back, I sent back to him that probably wasn't necessary, but you know what? These things happen.